Welcome to my channel. I'm so glad you're here. Before we dive into today's powerful story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world and helps me bring you more inspiring stories. Now, let's get started. A long time ago, in a small village surrounded by wide, open fields, there lived a man named Aleron. He was a hard-working farmer who grew crops to take care of his family. Life was simple, but Aleron was happy. He had a small piece of land, a few animals, and a loving wife, Aleron. They also had a little daughter named Mira, who brought them so much joy. Things weren't always easy, but Aleron loved his family and worked hard every day to make sure they had what they needed. However, one thing made life very hard for Aleron and the other villagers. The ruler of the land, King Armand, was a very harsh and unkind king. Every year, the farmers had to give a big part of their crops to the king as taxes. This left them with only a little bit for themselves, just enough to survive. Many farmers had lost their homes and farms because they couldn't pay the taxes. Everyone in the village lived in fear of the king's soldiers. Even during tough years, Aleron always managed to provide for his family. But this year was different. There had been a terrible drought. No rain had fallen, and most of the crops had dried up and died. The little food that did grow was barely enough to feed his family, let alone pay the king's taxes. Aleron felt a heavy weight in his heart. If he couldn't pay the taxes, the king's soldiers would come and take away what little he had. He couldn't let that happen. One night, as Aleron sat by the small fire with Aleron and Mira, he shared his worries. "I don't know what to do, Aleron," he said with a sigh. "The crops have failed, and the taxes are still due. We don't have anything left to give." Aleron placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We'll find a way," she said softly. "We have to keep hope alive. Maybe there's something we can do." Aleron nodded, though he didn't feel very hopeful. He had heard the stories. People who went to the king to beg for mercy were often punished instead. Still, he couldn't stand the thought of his family starving. He made a decision. "I'm going to the city," he said firmly. "I will ask the king for mercy." Aleron's eyes widened. "You want to ask the king for mercy? But he's never been kind to anyone." "I have to try," Aleron said, determination in his voice. "If we stay here and do nothing, we won't survive the winter." Early the next morning, Aleron packed a small bag and set off for the city. The journey was long and hard. He walked for days, his feet sore and his body tired, but he didn't stop. His thoughts were only of Aleron and Mira and how he had to do everything he could to save them. Finally, Aleron reached the great city. The king's palace stood high above the other buildings, with its tall stone walls and gleaming towers. Aleron stood at the palace gates, his clothes dirty and torn from the long journey. The guards, dressed in shiny silver armor with the king's crest, looked down at him with scorn. "What do you want, peasant?" one of the guards asked, his voice sharp and dismissive. I need to speak with the king," Aleron said, his voice shaking. "I've come to ask for mercy." The guards burst out laughing. "Mercy? The king doesn't have time for people like you," one of them sneered. But Aleron didn't back down. "Please," he said, his voice steady despite his fear. "My family is starving. We can't pay the taxes. I beg you, please let me speak with the king." The guards exchanged glances, then one of them shrugged. "Fine," he said. "Follow me." Aleron was led through the palace gates and into a courtyard filled with beautiful flowers and fountains. Everything around him was grand and glittering, so different from his simple life back in the village. Soon, he was brought before King Armand, who sat on a golden throne at the end of a grand hall. The king was a large man with a stern face. He wore a fine robe embroidered with gold and jewels that sparkled in the light. His piercing eyes seemed to look straight through Aleron. "Why are you here?" the king asked, his deep voice echoing through the hall. Aleron dropped to his knees, his heart racing. "Your Majesty," he said humbly, "I don't come to beg for charity. I ask only for mercy. My family is starving. The drought has destroyed our crops, and we have nothing left. We can't pay the taxes. Please, I beg you, help us." The king stared at Aleron in silence, his expression cold and unreadable. Aleron felt his hope slipping away. The king was known for being harsh and unforgiving. Why would he help a poor farmer like him? After a long pause, the king finally spoke. "You are a fool," he said angrily. "Do you think I care about the problems of a common farmer?" Aleron's heart sank, but he refused to give up. "Please, Your Majesty," he said, his voice trembling but strong. "I only ask for the life of my family. If you show us mercy, I promise we will find a way to repay you." The king stood up from his throne and walked slowly around Aleron, his eyes studying him closely. "Why should I help you?" the king asked. "You are nothing but a poor farmer." "I know I am nothing," Aleron replied, looking up with desperation in his eyes. "But I beg you, show us mercy. We are just trying to survive." The king paused, then let out a long sigh. "Perhaps I have been too harsh," he said quietly. "I will help you, but you must prove yourself worthy. If you can show me that you are more than just a poor farmer, I will show you mercy." Aleron nodded eagerly. "I will do whatever it takes, Your Majesty. I will prove myself." The king ordered that Aleron's family be given enough food to last the winter and some money to get back on their feet. But his final words lingered in Aleron's mind: "Prove yourself worthy." When Aleron returned home, he shared the news with Aleron and Mira. Together, they decided to repay the king with kindness. Over the years, their family became known for helping others, even when they had little to give. The king noticed this. Seeing their generosity, he began to question his own ways. Slowly, King Armand changed. He started to show mercy, not just to Aleron, but to all his people. Taxes were lowered, and help was given to those in need. Through one act of courage and mercy, Aleron had not only saved his family but inspired change that improved the lives of everyone in the land. Moral of the story: even in the face of hardship, courage and humility can lead to positive change. Acts of kindness and mercy have the power to inspire others, showing that true strength lies in compassion and generosity. Kindness and mercy can change lives. Being brave enough to ask for help and showing care for others can make the world a better place.